What I'm going to do is try to give you two different diagrams. So we can understand this. It almost takes a simple imaging of it. And it really is very simple. Maybe you'll even say simplistic. But I'm going to call this the false self. Now this is, I'm afraid, what we're doing a lot of times is we're baptizing the false self. We're ordaining the false self. We're giving communion to the false self. The false self is this little autonomous thing over here that tries to dress itself up, fortify itself, as we just said, make itself look Christian or Catholic or religious or whatever it wants to be, or moral. Now, people like Jesus come along, and in the presence of that, they say, unless the grain of wheat die, it remains just a grain of wheat. But if it dies, it will bear much fruit. Or he'll say, the branch cut off from the vine is useless. That's a really strong statement. It's useless. He goes even further. He says, you might as well throw it into the fire. It's a waste of time working with this thing. And yet that's exactly what we're doing. He's largely working with this false self. And the way we start, we all start here, there probably, and God certainly understands this, is we gaze at our navel and see, are we doing it right? And the question always is, how do I get over here? Now, over here, I guess you could call this God, heaven, eternity, the truth, the mystery. And the question is, what are the rules, what are the rituals, what are the practices that I can perform to get God to like me? That's where, in effect, everybody starts. They wouldn't put it in those words, right? But everybody does. And it's an okay starting place. It's just not a good continuing place. And it's a terrible ending place. Now, I want to right away, because we're going to jump back and forth to understand these, because this is necessary, by the way, to understand contemplation and the contemplative mind, we're going to draw the true self. This is the only self that's ever existed. It's the only self that exists right now. The trouble is, most people don't know it. They really don't. And the work of religion is to get you to know this. Religio, the very word means to rebind, to reconnect. You came forth from God. Your deepest DNA is divine. You are not human beings trying to become spiritual. That's how everybody starts. You are already spiritual beings. And the profound question is how to be human. I believe that's why Jesus came as a human being. Not to teach us how to go to heaven, to teach us how to be a human being here on this earth. Can you imagine how different the history of Western Christianity would have been if we would have concentrated on teaching Christians how to be human beings in this world? Instead of all this heaven talk. Remember I said in the first prayer, it's all about now, but how you do it now. We took all the power out of the now, and we put all the power into the future. Everything was a reward, punishment, was going to happen later. And so now was sort of a game, or an obstacle course, or a testing ground, that you really didn't take it in itself seriously. It's all play acting, and hopefully playing it right so that you get the reward later. So here I have the small self, and you can call it that if you want. Psychologically, Jung would call this the small self, and call this the great self with a big S. When the small self knows that it has no meaning, no foundation, apart from who it is in God, that's transformation. When I live, no longer, not I. You see, that is a different experience of the self. Just as you have a heart transplant, this is an identity transplant. Just as you have a lung transplant or a liver transplant, it is I can't say it's strong enough, it's a different sense of the I. A different sense of the self. A different sense of the who that you are. I always love to say, excuse me, we got to get the who right. Who are we? Who are we? And most people don't know. They think they are this private self. This Richard thing, this Ben thing, this Judy thing, this Susan thing, all of which is fine, but Merton says it so well. He says, one thing for sure about heaven, there won't be much of you there. In other words, the you that you think is you, this little thing, now this is secular consciousness. This is the world we live in today. This is what people, that's all you have. And so you have to dress it up. You have to defend it. You can make a pretty general statement. Whenever you're defensive, it's always the false self. This self is so secure, it never has any, it doesn't have any, there's nothing to defend, if you follow me. There's nothing to be offended. And I tell many people, that's how you know you're living in the false self at that moment, if you take offense at anything. If you took offense in the kitchen at Tepeyac this morning because someone didn't clean up after themselves. I mean, I probably would have too. But don't do it for more than 15 seconds, you know. Because for more than 15 seconds, that's just your little insecure self that needs to be pampered or needs to define itself by cleanliness or whatever it might be, or order, you know. This self is pretty unoffendable. It really is. It's just, I can see why the Bible said, don't let the sun go down on your anger. You'll get angry for a few minutes, but you can't identify with it. You can't feed it. You don't let it possess you, as I said last week. Huh? Now, the rules here are sort of the rules of what I'm going to call requirement religion. It's always looking for what are the correct requirements. And every religion is convinced that it has the correct requirements. Huh? It forces you toward legalism and ritualism eventually. Huh? Here, it's not about requirements, it's about relationship. The quality and your capacity for relatedness. Now, I hope you can see how I'm laying the foundation for contemplation. Because this self will say prayers, but this self is a prayer. Just by being, just by walking from here to there, it is a prayer. Now that's why Paul can say something like, pray always. He can't mean walking around saying Our Fathers and Hail Marys, huh? But how you can pray always is when you live in conscious union